Hello, environmental defenders. Welcome and happy Human Rights Day. Both human and environmental rights. Today and every day, my name is Christine Samaru, and I'm the Managing Director of the Breadfruit Collective and the co-chair of the Human Rights Working Group under the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance. It is an honor to champion and support the execution of this regional campaign along with Canary and FEMA. A special thank you to the Strong Caribbean Together Network, who is supporting this event with translation in Haitian Creole. A big thank you to the entire Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance. Over the past 2 months, with your invaluable support, we have worked together to execute the first phase of this regional campaign, Caribbean Perspectives on Escazú, Our Rights, Our Future. Throughout the process, we launched a campaign with speakers who highlighted the importance of the Escazú Agreement at the international, regional, and local levels. Through social media, we shared various posts that emphasized the significance of this agreement, and we connected with environmental defenders and the vital work that they are doing. For those who are now interested in showing your support for the campaign publicly, you can access the Escazú Campaign Support Badge to add to your photo. You can access the link through our chat. Tomorrow, we'll also be sharing the data that we collected during the campaign's pre-survey. As we wrap up this first phase, it is no coincidence that we're doing this on Human Rights Day. Our goal for today's event is to strengthen the connection between the Escazú Agreement and human rights. Human Rights Day also marks the end of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And as justice leaders, we understand that our struggles are deeply interconnected. Reflecting on 2024, we recognize that ecocides and the harm done to our land are intrinsically linked to the harm done to our people. Genocides have no place in the world that we are building, one that is safe and liberated. We must remember that our liberation struggles are one and the same. And when we're giving the space, we must call out and lift the names of places. We continue to mobilize and support for our colleagues in Haiti, as well as the people of Palestine, Congo, Sudan, Tigray, and all places where violence continues to violate people's fundamental human rights to live in peace. The Universal Declaration on Human Rights states that all human rights are born free and equal in dignity and rights. These struggles are our struggles when human rights are not respected. Centering the Escazú Agreement in our work is about solidarity at a time when our human rights are being questioned in more ways than one. The agreement guarantees our right in the Caribbean to access environmental information, participate in decision-making that affects our lives, and access justice in environmental matters. One of the most critical and transformative aspects of the agreement is its protection of environmental defenders. For the first time in history, we have a legally binding document that explicitly safeguards those on the front lines of defending our environment. Governments who ratify the agreement are required to create safe and enabling conditions for environmental defenders and to ensure that perpetrators of violence and intimidation against them are held accountable. This year, Human Rights Day is observed under the theme, Our Rights, Our Future, Right Now, which aligns perfectly with our event today. Our Rights, Our Future, Advancing the Escazú in the Caribbean. This campaign has been a platform for all the work we've been involved in our respective countries. It is crucial for us to understand how interconnected this agreement is with our work and interests. Understanding this, we shed light and stand in solidarity with our colleagues in Jamaica as they continue to push for environmental transparency and accountability around the Rio Cobre oil spill. When action, the Escazú Agreement provides us with the tool we need to fight for justice, human rights, and environmental sustainability. Human rights are women's rights. Human rights are migrants' rights. Human rights are indigenous rights. The Escazú Agreement speaks to transparency. It is fundamentally about protecting both people and the planet. We continue to stand united, raise our voices, and ensure that those doing the hard work of defending our environment are protected and supported. Our campaign has sparked conversation across the region, and we hope to continue in the new year to unpack the implementation of this critical agreement. Thank you so much for being a part of this significant event today. The struggle for environmental justice is inherently tied to our struggles for the right to live in a safe, healthy, and dignified environment, which is essential to our human well-being. It is now my honor to introduce you to our moderator, Ms. Britney Nurse, an attorney at law and an advocate for environmental justice. Britney will lead the conversation with our dynamic panel. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Christine, for that warm introduction. As Christine mentioned, my name is Britney Nurse, and I am an attorney at law that's based in Trinidad and Tobago. And it is indeed my pleasure to serve as your moderator for this afternoon's panel. We are thrilled to have this conversation as part of Human Rights Day, a global reminder of our collective responsibility to uphold justice, equality, and sustainability. Today, we'll explore the Escazú Agreement, a groundbreaking instrument and multilateral environmental instrument that strengthens environmental governance, protects human and environmental rights, and also fosters inclusive public participation. So without further ado, let's begin by giving a warm welcome to our esteemed panelists. Today we have with us Ms. Hélène Glénisson, who is a project officer at the International Organization for Migration, and her work involves migration, environment, and climate change for the Caribbean. We also have with us Samunda Jabini, who is a community engagement consultant with deep experience working with indigenous and tribal communities in Suriname. Last but not least, we have Toshao Romario Hastings. He is a chief of the Kako village located in Upper Mazaruni of Guyana, and he is a leader in sustainable development and community empowerment. I'd also like to take this time to acknowledge our partners, Canary Caribbean, the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance, FEMA, and the Stronger Caribbean Together Network for convening this critical dialogue. Before we dive in, please note that interpretation services are available in Haitian Creole, and the instructions for accessing this translation can be found in the chat. You are free to select the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. And if you're joining in from your phone, you can just select the three dots at the bottom of your phone screen, select the interpretation service, and tap done. Okay, so without further ado, let's start by getting to know each of our panelists and their work. I will pose a question to each of the panelists, and we'll begin with Romario. So, could you share with us your work in advocating for human rights and the role of the Escazú Agreement that it plays in supporting your work? Romario?
Hi, right. So good afternoon to all the listeners, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm joining, of course, from my little village in Upper Mazaruni in Kako. Currently, I would say over the past years, the approach to environmental justice and human rights and indigenous rights, all of which intersect for us. I believe it has been like a collective effort. So when I speak about my role, I feel more comfortable speaking about our role as a community, because it is impossible to do it alone as a leader. And many times what I have seen is that the community support is what really drives advocacy from the grassroots level. So it is only unfair for me to just speak about what I do. Having said that, I would say that our role, of which I am a part of, is that we find ourselves to be indeed, I can confidently say that we are environmental defenders. And I think this is one of the key components of the Escazú Agreement, recognizing that, and indigenous peoples on a whole, and including my people, the Akò community here in Kako, have, I think, definitely, I would say, played a significant influence in terms of the nature of our environment and our community and our territory as it is today. And in many conversations I have had, for example, we would say that it is because of our people and our community that this part of Guyana remains as it is, very quite protected, preserved. And if it wasn't for the community and Kako, to be quite specific, has been known to be staunch defenders against river mining and pollution and the interconnectedness of all of the environment. And so we have quite a long history in terms of the commitment and the devotion towards, I would say, protecting our territories. And over the years, I would say that we have realized that it is not an easy task. It is definitely not a safe journey, particularly for the leaders. And this is where I think it becomes a bit more interesting for me when I really look at this Escazú Agreement. The actions of communities, the actions of our people, when it comes to, like, for example, dealing with powerful parties or powerful stakeholders, or even if you have to be facing the courts, it is not the people, but it is the leader, right? And Kako has been quite an example of that. And so I know what I'm speaking about. And so the actions of the people to defend, it has consequences on the leader. And so that is the environment that we have to work within. And looking at Escazú, I would say that this is something that it definitely is groundbreaking for us, while also admitting that it's still, I would say, there is a faint understanding of really what it is. And I think this links to this whole idea of access to information. To our communities, hardly have readily accessible information to many things in policies, programs, projects. Only a few days ago, our community got connected to the internet system. Other than that, it was just privately owned, you know? So imagine a world where many decisions are being taken and where information is just, you know, there is a whole pool of information digitally, and people expect you to just access and read and make, but that is not how things work still on the ground for many indigenous communities. Luckily for them, if they have people that sincerely just have that concern, that they can then I would say assist communities in making this information available, whether if it's individuals, civil society organizations. Many times that has been the case for us in this region. So I would say that it definitely I would maybe creates this new I wouldn't say a sense of protection, but maybe more as to in more like I would say an encouragement to now engage our leaders to have this materialize and maybe action more at a community, regional or national level. I myself, I'm really learning as to what can be the I would say some positive outcomes from such an agreement, if it is to really be implemented here for our communities, but also for those which are affected by issues that it addresses. So maybe I can stop there. I don't want to continue too long, but yeah, that sort of like summarizes our experiences here and our role in the whole human rights, environmental rights, but also what Escazú means for us at the moment, because we still to understand more as a community and as a people.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Romario. And just takeaway that I want to pinpoint here is something you said, which is very important. You know, taking on the role of a leader is never an easy job. And I think especially when you're the leader of a frontline community that is trying to protect their history and protect just the environment from pollution and from people coming in, it is a difficult job. And I think this is where, you know, the Escazú Agreement really comes in handy to be used as that tool to protect the leaders as well as their communities. So I just want to thank you for the work that you have been doing, of course, in your community. It is being recognized, whether you know it or not, it has been. And, you know, we very much look forward to the work that comes out of this and how the Escazú Agreement can be materialized. So moving now to Samunda, same question. Share with us, you know, the work that you've been doing and how the Escazú Agreement has been supporting this work.
Thank you, Britney. Hi, everyone. My name is Samunda Jabini. I hail from the Samaka community in Suriname. We are a tribal community, Afro-descendant tribal community that settled along the Suriname River, Upper Suriname River, and we have been living there for over 300 years. And just to agree with what Romario just mentioned, that the way we are living, it's just we have been defending the environment for a very long time. In Suriname, we have the case that the indigenous and the tribal communities are still advocating to get the land rights legally recognized, which is still a struggle in Suriname. In 2007, the Samaka community they won a case against the state of Suriname at the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. And 17 years later, the state still fails to comply with the judgment. The indigenous community, the Lokono and Kalinya in Suriname, also won a case against the state for the same reasons. And still, nothing has been done. So these are the struggles that we have in Suriname regarding human rights violations. These are not the only ones, but these are the ones that I'm more familiar with and that's more related to my work. So related to those cases and those issues, we also still facing environmental destruction. The government is giving out concessions in our communities without implementing the free prior informed consent strategies. So no FPIC is being mentioned or implemented, and large parts of our communities, of our territories are being given out in concessions, in mining and logging concessions. So these are the ways how we are experiencing human rights violation daily in Suriname. So in that regard, I am working with a community-based organization called the Association of Samaka Communities, where we are engaging. At first, it started as engaging only the leaders. That's how they went to the Inter-American Court, how they got there, because it's mostly the leaders, the chiefs that were involved in the fight. But now we are looking to engage a broader scope of the communities. Women are involved, and that's actually my job, involving and engaging women and youth in this process to get them more active, to assume more active roles in governance and territorial governance, in sustainable forest management, in conserving of our culture. So it's very important that young people and women especially are very much engaged in this process. So that's part of my job, and the way that the Escazú Agreement, the role that it has in my work. So something I would like to mention is that Suriname didn't ratify this agreement. But if you look at the work that civil society, community-based organization has been doing, so we have been doing what the government is supposedly supposed to be doing, like what this agreement is what we can do with this agreement is all to hold people accountable, that the state knows their role. But civil society has been doing this. We have been sharing information with the communities. We have been making sure that people are aware of their human rights, know that people are aware of what's going on. We're talking about the climate crisis, knowing how indigenous communities are and what our belief systems are. We would blame ourselves, we would blame our way of life for what's happening. But our people are most of the time we are not aware of the science. So like just like Romario mentioned before, most of our communities don't have access to certain information. And just to mention that of the climate crisis, I feel like a lot of organizations, NGOs, that are working in our environment, in our communities, they will mostly um, look for solutions outside of our communities. So they will come with solutions, but will not really mention or really recognize the traditional knowledge that already exists. And then use that knowledge also to engage people in these decision making. So most of the time, the state, NGOs, individuals, companies, they will make decisions. They will come into the communities and then they will enforce these decisions onto the people while not really engaging them in the whole process. So I feel like we cannot come up with solutions outside of our people if we don't even um, explain what the issue is. If people don't really realize what is actually the cause of the problem that we're facing, and that will only make it worse, and that including people in the decision making processes. So there's different issues that we could there's different aspects of the Escazú Agreement that we could mention and how it involves, or how my work revolves around that. We're talking about environmental defenders. I am considered an human rights defender in Suriname. So if we're thinking about the safety of people that are doing the same thing that I'm doing, um, we had a case last year in Suriname where two indigenous peoples were murdered for defending their territories, or defending their territories and not having access to certain resources that people outside their communities are having access to. And they were murdered, and other people are still locked up and are called terrorists for just defending their territories, their communities. So these are the things that we're really facing in Suriname. And the Escazú Agreement could be a way to help us yeah how do we face these issues. And yeah, then I personally have my own concerns, like seeing the two cases that we already have for the Zamaka and the indigenous communities. The state is still not obliged to comply with those judgments. So even if we have these agreements, we see that still an issue to keep states, to hold states accountable for their responsibilities. So yeah, I can go on and on about it,
Yeah.
but I think this gives a picture of the situation in Suriname.
Thank you, Samunda. And I think this is essentially why this dialogue is so critical and important at this stage that we're at. Because without this, we would not even know of the situation that's happening in Suriname, for those that are on the outside. And so it's important for us to continue having these discussions, but also to push for information to get out there, because we know it ourselves. The civil society organizations and the NGOs have really been the bread and butter of pushing the Escazú Agreement and just generally defending for human rights and the environment. And, we do, of course, just want to take a moment to acknowledge the lives that have been lost in this fight, because we know it's been countless of other defenders that have so tirelessly worked for this cause. And at times you may think, what is it all for? Why are we why are we continuing along this fight? You mentioned the fact that, you know, people living in the community may even start to blame their own lifestyle, but when you grow tired of fighting for a cause, it could sometimes just really weigh down on you. But nonetheless, you know, I think it's very important as well for the community support and even just having a regional network that can also share that burden in a way when it is that the local community is also, you know, facing the emotional turmoil of it. So thank you so much for sharing. And moving now to Hélène, same question, just sharing on your work and, you know, how the role of the Escazú has been supporting that work.
Yes, thank you very much, Christine and Britney, for the introduction. And it is such a pleasure and honor to be part of this outstanding panel, along with Samunda and Romario on Human Rights Day. First of all, I would like to acknowledge again what Christine mentioned just a few minutes ago about the struggle for environmental justice is inherently tied to the struggle for the right to live in a safe, healthy, and dignified environment, which is essential for to human well-being. And when speaking about human well-being, we need to speak about migrants. The communities of origin and the host communities are fully part of it and having a crucial role. That's why I'm here today, is also to advocate about the linkages with human mobility. And that's why at IOM, the International Organization for Migration, we are working on further linking environment and migrant justice with definitely a human rights perspective and supporting civil society, governments, and other relevant actors in integrating those dimensions. All in all, and in these efforts, the Escazú Agreement is such a pivotal framework that, in partnership with Ideas Eye Foundation from Trinidad and Tobago, we started by introducing the agreement in a capacity building workshop for civil society last year. And this year we went deeper into studying the agreement to identify the linkages with human mobility. As human mobility is not directly mentioned in the agreement, but its three provisions on access to environmental information, participate in decision making, and access to justice in environmental matters are essential to the decision to stay and or move in the context of environmental changes. And for instance, indigenous peoples and other vulnerable communities and people such as women may tend to face higher potentiality to move and to be forced to migrate. So this is important also in the context of climate change. So I think this is important to mention as well. And so all in all, so a few weeks ago, we released a policy paper, the policy paper called Environmental Justice Lens, the Escazú Agreement as a tool to address human mobility in the Caribbean, which is offering key recommendations on how the agreement addresses human mobility in the Caribbean, and why its full adoption would greatly address the people in the Caribbean, the human rights, human mobility patterns in the region. I will just now put in the chat the link to the policy paper for those that who would like to read it. And just to end up, and from also what Romario and Samunda mentioned, I think this what is important also to as just a one sentence is that there are protection gaps for people, for the environment, and focusing on environmental defenders, as Escazú is focusing on environmental defenders. But we need to also acknowledge the protection that is provided by indigenous peoples, by civil society in their country, in their territories. So I think this is also important, just to conclude a bit what we are doing under the Escazú Agreement.
Thank you, Hélène. And I think it's very important that you raise that point that, you know, some people may not be aware of, there are some jurisdictions within the Caribbean that do explicitly provide for the protection of indigenous communities and to some extent indigenous rights within the Caribbean. And we hope, and it has been again the work of civil society organizations and activists to pressure our leaders to making certain amendments within their legislation and even by way of policy development to enshrine those rights within our constitutions and also within our laws, just so that we can close those protection gaps that you so rightfully pointed out. Just as I have you, I would like to ask you whether, you can just share a bit deeper as to the policy paper that you mentioned on human mobility, environmental justice, and the Escazú Agreement. And thank you so much for sharing the link. If you could pinpoint exactly how the Escazú Agreement can facilitate better the human mobility in the Caribbean, because I'm sure there are members in the audience that would like to know, how can we utilize this agreement, especially in circumstances where climate migration and protection for climate refugees is not something that is well recognized in our region and globally. I would say, we'd more see asylum being sought for those that are, fleeing from any political asylum and things like that. But what happens in a situation where a community has been displaced because of a natural disaster, right? Or an indigenous community has to be moved. So if you can probably just share some more light on how the Escazú Agreement can facilitate the human mobility, that would be grateful.
No, sure. Do you hear me? Yes?
Yes,
perfect.
I can hear you. Yeah.
No, sure. I can expand a little bit more on this, and it can take me days, I would say. But to be kind of short, I would say, and for the interest of time, one thing first, when you spoke about climate refugees, it's not a term that is acknowledged and recognized internationally. There is no agreement on what would be climate refugees. Under the Geneva Agreement framework, we recognize refugees due to conflicts, religion discrimination, but for instance, but not from the climate change, climate crisis. So this is one thing. And then indeed, the agreement through its free provision and the focus on environmental defenders is ultimately making people more resilient to the impacts of environmental changes, climate change. So yes, the agreement offers a robust foundation for mitigating the adverse impacts of climate change while fostering resilience and adaptation among vulnerable populations, including migrants, indigenous peoples, and women, for instance. However, I would not say that the Escazú Agreement facilitates migration, displacement, and or planned relocation, but I would more use the term of addressing human mobility in multiple ways. As I mentioned, human mobility, migration, displacement, and or planned relocation is not terms that are included in the Escazú Agreement as yet, but I believe strongly, and with at IOM, but also with Ideas I Foundation, that it is covered in multiple ways in the Caribbean region and for the Latin America region as well. And in few ways that I will now cite it. The first one I would say is empowering vulnerable populations. The agreement ensures that communities, including migrants and displaced persons affected by climate change, are informed about environmental risk. That is very important. And also about mitigation strategies. This enables them to make well-informed decisions about migration, relocation, and adaptation options. So that's why migrants are also included, I would say, as vulnerable communities that would need to access environmental information. Then, secondly, inclusive decision-making. The agreement emphasizes the inclusion of vulnerable groups, such as indigenous populations, migrants, and women, for instance, in policy-making processes. This ensures that their voices, migrants' voices, along with others, are represented in environmental governance. Fostering equitable solutions to climate-induced mobility challenges, I would say. Thirdly, we are also recognizing that strengthening legal protections is important. The Escazú Agreement provides a framework to access justice, protecting the rights of environmental migrants and displaced populations. By advocating for fair treatment and redress mechanisms, it may safeguard human rights during displacement caused by environmental disasters, for instance. Two more, I would say, are regional cooperation. The agreement supports collaborative efforts as part of the four articles, beside of their four articles. Of its four articles, the collaboration and cooperation is very important among Caribbean nations to address shared environmental challenges, including cross-border migration induced by climate change. We can see that during the 2017 hurricane season that hit Dominica, Antigua, and Barbuda, it was important to have a regional collaboration framework to help people move from one island to the other. And this cooperation aids in disaster preparedness, relocation planning, and resilience building. The last one I would mention is capacity building and awareness through training and educational initiatives. The agreement bolsters community and institutional capacity to handle environmental challenges. This includes empowering local populations to advocate for their rights and adapt to changing environmental conditions, ultimately reducing forced migration risk. All in all, and to conclude again, I would say that by aligning with international frameworks like the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, and also the Global Compact for Migration, the GCM, the Escazú Agreement enhances resilience and supports human mobility in ways that prioritize justice and sustainability at the same time. So I think this is what now we are doing, what we want to expand more and support and further strengthen this recognition in the region. So over to you, Britney.
Thank you so much, Hélène, for your contributions on this much needed topic. I think, I can definitely speak for myself, but I hope the audience as well found it very informative. And I definitely look forward to reading more of the policy paper on this topic. I just want to quickly go to the chat because I did see that there were some questions coming in. And I see that we have a question from Pat Northover in the chat. And the question was in relation to Samunda's contribution earlier. Pat mentioned that the struggles in Suriname are not being made visible. Should we have a campaign to make public the names of these environmental defenders who have been murdered in Suriname and in prison? How do we honor their sacrifice? So, Samunda, I'm just going to direct this question to you, if it is that you want to answer that. And I'll move on to the other questions after. Samunda?
Yes, thank you for that question. We have never stood still since this happened. Since last year, it happened in May. Last year in October, the organization I work for, the Association of Samaka Community, together with the organization of the indigenous, one of the organization of the indigenous peoples, we went. We appeared before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We addressed these issues. We addressed this, and of course, some of the issues, not all issues that gets addressed at the commission really gets to the court. But hopefully, we will get a chance to address these issues before the Inter-American Court on Human Rights next year. But we have been talking about is that this is something that is really known in Suriname about what's been happening. What we have noticed is that the action or the campaigning against these injustices that the indigenous and tribal people are experiencing, sometimes we feel like it's only our fight. Sometimes we feel like we don't get enough support from other groups or other organization or enough support from the civil society that are not really community based. So we would love to have more support on that, especially international. So I really love that idea of a campaign, naming the environmental defenders that we lost. And I also want to mention this is not only an issue that we face, and that's only Suriname face, but I know that there's also other countries and other communities that face these threats and these challenges with their environmental defenders. So I really agree with that campaign, and yeah, if we are working on that, I would like to join to be part of that. So yeah, that's one suggestion, and there could be many more on how to protect and defend our environmental defenders.
Thank you, Samunda. Pat, I hope that answers your question. I also just want to address some other questions in the chat. There was a question, I think, from Vandas, and he has asked, he or she, I'm so sorry, has Trinidad and Tobago ratified the Escazú? I can confirm that Trinidad and Tobago has not signed or ratified the Escazú Agreement, unfortunately. But again, the work of the civil society organizations and the role of this advocacy campaign is with the hope that we can put some pressure on our leaders to do so, probably, hopefully by tomorrow, but in the near future. There was also a question as to whether Jamaica has ratified the Escazú, and to confirm, Jamaica has signed on to it, I think in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. Right now, they have not ratified the agreement. So there's been a lot of traction in Jamaica through the Jamaican Environment Trust to push the government to ratify this agreement. Otherwise, the protection that's provided under the treaty, cannot be accessed by the citizens of the country. So this is why, discussions like this and the work that we all do is so important, because we ultimately want to see that our rights and the environment are protected. So before I move on to any of the other questions in the chat, I do want to bring back Chief Hastings, just to ask him a direct question in relation to public participation. Romario, as a chief of the Kako village, how do you encourage public participation in your territory, and what else can sectors such as the government and developers do, I would say, to collaborate effectively and ensure that the goals of the Escazú Agreement are actualized at the community level?
All right. Yes. So for a community like ours, we still, I would say, maintain some traditions in terms of how we hold our meetings to foster some level of public participation. For Guyana, we have within the Avanse Act, which governs indigenous governance through village councils. I'm basically chair of the village council here, and we are mandated to hold village general meetings, and this is where we have discussions on a whole host of issues or matters that relates to our priorities, our interests, and many others that can fit in on our agenda. So what we try to do as leaders or as a council is to ensure that communities first and foremost are able to, I would say, to have an input in key decisions that affects not only the people themselves, but the territory in a whole. And this is a practice that we uphold. And many times also that we have contended with governments, with organizations, that for certain issues or certain, I would say, cases that leaders like myself are required to engage in communities before any decision can be made. So although as a chief or as a leader that we are empowered to make certain decisions on behalf of our villages, we still find it paramount to involve the communities. And a good example for Guyana is like the carbon credits program, which has a lot to do with also human rights and in some of our cases that our leaders have tried to I would say push for more I would say continuous dialogue with communities and things where we shouldn't just be like a one-off discussion or consultation, but something that more respects the model that which we follow, where we have a continuous sort of dialogue at a community level. So I would say generally that is what happens. And also where necessary, we hold, I would say, special like emergency meetings with our residents. It can happen in the night, in the evening, in the morning, as we see it necessary to do so. How others, I would say, can maybe collaborate to actualize the whole Escazú at a community level. There can be many ways to do that, but maybe looking at things that are more relevant for me, first and foremost, I think someone also touched on that earlier, is education and awareness. If you don't know what is out there in terms of your rights or in terms of new agreements that supports or defends and protects you, then you really cannot effectively use it. And we have learned this from the past through our efforts to empower communities, our communities, in terms of in increasing their knowledge on certain rights and certain laws. Firstly, the Amerindian Act, again, which governs our villages here in Guyana. And you have international, I would say, conventions and laws like the UN DRIP, which many I'm certain are aware about in here. And now we have something I think quite relevant to our communities and the way the realities that we have currently, and where we find ourselves many times at the intersection of economic development and also trying to really secure our rights as indigenous peoples. So once I think this level of mobilization and information sharing can happen to our villages, I've seen on at least several occasions that we do make an effort to utilize these tools, or maybe in our advocacy work we can make those pertinent linkages in terms of holding governments accountable, or organizations accountable, developers accountable. So that is one. Education is important. Secondly, I would also say that for it to really have an effect on the ground, maybe there needs to be some sort of safe space created for environmental defenders and environmental leaders. Because like, I like to speak from experience, and many times I pull from those of others, also from myself and from community, that many times the indigenous leaders are pushed to be at the forefront. Many times we do it on our own, and also sometimes we are encouraged to do the job, to do the work, because it is necessary, it has to be done. But the other question is, so then what happens when I'm at when I get to face the brunt of I would say, what we call the consequences of this, or the lashback to what is happening. So many times we as leaders don't have maybe the necessary resources to take legal actions. Maybe we don't necessarily have to know how, or where do I go, what do I do, how do I respond, and all of these things. So to be able to create this kind of network and environment for environmental leaders, defenders, I think is also another way that we can really make it work. Because if it is the fact that we find ourselves working isolatedly, and I can tell you that this work is not easy, and the minute you see that you become a person of target and a prominent face or poster child for defending the environment or defending your rights, you begin to find that many persons disassociate from you. But this is not a time that you should be alone. You need as much support as you can from people that share the same values and goals, either locally, nationally, or even globally. So that's something we also need to think about. And I don't think we are there as yet, as Indigenous leaders. So many times we take the easy way out in terms of withdrawing. So we may have a good first instance, but secondly, I said, no, I can't do this again because I have a family who can place at risk. So what do I do? What support is there for us, you know? And many times our safest places are right within our communities because this is where we have the strongest bond. And that is what I appreciate a lot. The minute you leave your community, it's there, you are more susceptible to a whole, I would say a diverse range of, threats that you can face. And now in this digital age, many can come in the form of cyber war or threats and violence that you see out there. And so this is I would say, the climate within which we work, and that we have to promote our rights and our goals and our visions of what we have as a community. Lastly, I would say that access to justice is really a big issue for our communities also. And even before we speak about the environment, for our leaders, this has always been an issue. Access to the necessary resources, maybe to hold developers accountable for certain projects that really impair our environment. We have in the Constitution for Guyana, for example, we have a right to a safe and clean environment. What does that really mean? How is that really represented in reality? You know, who respects that? And so for us, many times we have had to rely on pro bono services, for example, to ensure that we make this stand to defend what we have and what is ours. So for Escazú to have such an effect, also, I think for communities, we need to build those linkages of how can it work, and to really ensure communities are empowered to realize maybe the opportunities that are there, or what sort of services we can access. Because if that is not done, then again, there is only so much that we can do. So currently, like in the village, we are looking at maybe working with justice clinics, or maybe some like free legal aids, even if it's a matter of advice and guidance in terms of environmental governance, or making recommendations on environmental policies. These are things the communities need. So if that is not in place, then we will not achieve the impact that we want to as a community, and of course, coupled with other persons that are also behind the goals of Escazú. So those, I would say, are just some few thoughts on the whole, as a leader, but also how I see or how I experience it here at a local level.
Thank you, Romario, for sharing those thoughts, and some very excellent recommendations as well. I think it's always important for us to highlight the struggles that we face in the work that we do. It is not easy work, and I think one of the key takeaways from this is that we all need a hand-holding and support group with this work, because it's not easy, especially for the leaders that are, again, on the frontline communities. It's also very important for us to also be involved in the dialogue that happens where there's a development happening, or there's laws and policies that are being developed. How do we look at the participation on the side of civil society and just local communities? Because as we are all aware, most of the times we just get a one-off consultation with the government, or you may not get any at all. So pushing for, that continuous consultation is very important. It's also very important, leading back to the point that you're making about educating, just so that people know exactly what the problems are. It's important that we are able to identify the issues so that we will know what the solutions are as well. And one thing I can definitely also get behind is, getting those services as well available to communities that need it. And from my own personal experience, as a lawyer, it's difficult at times when it is that a community leader or even members of the community are coming to make a complaint about something that's happening within their community, and the legal and justice system doesn't always deliver in the way that you'd hope or expect. So there's another hurdle with that. We have been really pushing for, just the training and development, even of our, legal staff, the lawyers, even to some extent judges as well. But I think it does come down to a collaborative effort on a whole. It comes down to everybody having the information, everybody getting the education, and also everybody participating in this much needed process. So thank you so much for, just your contributions, as I said. And, I'm very much looking forward to how things can transform within the next few months, possibly within the new year as well. Just to go back to the audience, I saw that there were a few questions coming in, and I figured I will just throw this again to you panelists. This is another question, again, coming from Ivy, and she asks, how can Suriname balance economic development, such as mining, oil project, or large agriculture, with the protection of environmental rights? So, Samunda, if you would like, you can take this question.
Yes. So I've been asked this question a few times or in different ways. And I feel like I don't know how to answer this question and really do it justice, because we are seeing, if we're looking at what's happening right now. Suriname has recently signed an agreement to go and produce oil and gas. So now we are also seeing, we don't have to talk about the impact of the fossil fuel industry, right? And we know that Surinamese people, we have this pride of how forested our country is. We have over 90% of forest cover, or used to, because I don't believe it's still at that number. But it's something we really brag about. Our government, that the state loves to brag about how much forest we have as a country. It boils down to the people who actually made sure that we actually have as much forest as we do. We are not really legally recognized. We are not really mentioned in the Constitution of Suriname. So to talk about balanced economic development with protection of environment rights. So I don't know how that will go. How can you balance it? That's also a question I'm looking for an answer. Because
I think we all are.
Yeah, because what's happening right now, we see that it's benefits is personal gain over
Correct.
the environment, right? We have been doing this. Our ancestors have been doing this for decades, right? I'm actually a third generation human rights defender in Suriname. So if every 30 years there has to be another generation that has to fight for the same things their ancestors fought for, where are we going?
Yeah.
So right now what's happening is just the economic gain, the economic benefits, personal benefits that states are focused on. So I don't see how we could balance those two things, because it's not happening right now. Right now, every economic development is based on, we have to lose some healthy environment for our countries to grow economically. So we see that's what's happening. So I don't have that answer that is really satisfying. It's just really sad what's happening.
Yeah.
But this question, yeah, I've heard it so many times before, but still, I don't have a real question, a real answer for this.
But I appreciate still the answer is still real because we're all just trying to figure it out at the end of the day. And, I think it is just one of those unfortunate realities that we deal with again in our work as defenders in one way, shape, or form. It does boil down to, how do we put the onus on those that are truly accountable? We've been seeing that happening even at the international conferences. We saw the outcome of COP29 and, the frustration that it left on a lot of our negotiators as well. So, everyone is still circling on this balancing act. But at the end of the day, if it is that individually we're not able to, or even on a global north, global south, or even just a state, if it is that it's their prerogative to simply gain and make profits and just be the richest country in the world, we're always going to be fighting that battle of, okay, well, what is more important here? Is it going to be the people that live in the state that make sure that the state is functioning, or is it just going to be about economic gain? So again, this is why, we, in our discussions of the Escazú Agreement and how, we can try to implement it or encourage our leaders to ratify it, it's also about having these open, honest, and real conversations about what can be done and what will be a reasonable, practical solution. So at this time, I will just pose the final wrap-up question for all panelists. And I just want to thank everybody in the audience for being so engaging this afternoon. I saw a lot of discussions coming out of the audience today. And, you guys are free to also check the chat because there were some links that were posted for later reading, probably bedtime reading today. There's also been some notices about the third regional forum on defenders, which will take place in St. Kitts and Nevis in April next year. So for anybody that is interested, you can also check that out. And there have also been some other useful links that have been shared. So feel free to check out the chat before you leave today. So as we approach the end of the discussion, I'd just like to ask each of the panelists, in your various capacities, how would the full ratification and implementation of the Escazú Agreement transform your work? Hélène, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Britney, and thank you very much for this very rich discussion we just had, and also those concrete live example that Romario and Samunda just gave, and also in the chat. I think the Escazú Agreement ratification and implementation would create a more equitable and resilient framework for environmental governance, but this needs ratification, but as we just mentioned, it needs implementation too. And this is why, as an international organization, as civil society, we need to cross-cut all those silos and working together to help implementing. Ratification is the first step, that's for sure. But then we need political will, then we need also resources, financial resources, capacity resources, knowledge resources, and all in all, this is important. I would also mention that just try to highlight a more positive view at the end of these two, and to try to find a positive way of working after this discussion is maybe that what will transform and what is transforming with Escazú is that we are really recognizing that environmental rights as human rights. And this is helping us in having some language to move forward the agenda. So all in all, I think we need more recognition, we need more support, and hopefully we will find a balance, for instance, between economic development, taking into account environmental defenders, the environmental nature, and a sustainable way of developing our countries all together. So, and this needs to be taken into account in bigger venue as well, such as COP. So keep positive.
Thank you, Hélène. Now on to Romario.
Hi, so I'm not sure what happened there, but please excuse me. Yes, so I would love to really see how it can really be implemented and actualized. However, I remain optimistic. There are a few things that cross my mind in terms of how it can really be impactful for, again, coming from an indigenous perspective. I would say one is definitely that it's gonna obligate the government and developers and those who we partner with to really meaningfully participate with us. That is one. Many times, I think which you also made a remark about earlier, many times we may not have an issue with a program or a project or a policy, but we often have a challenge when it comes to agreeing with the process. The process is something that is critical to the success of the whole thing as well. So in Guyana, you would see that we have had several contentions on the process over something, you know, and it just simply means that we want to take, I would say, reasonable time to have a conversation, to have a dialogue, to have a discussion, to have a consultation on things that affect our communities and our lands. And so I would say that with Escazú, perhaps this can really be actualized if it is implemented here in our country, but also at our local levels. The other thing that I thought about is we as communities want to be not just recipients, but partners in managing the environment, you know, environmental governance, in policy making, but more so that we are dealing with territories that are quite expansive. We want to I would say, co-create and co-manage. And I think this is something that should be also respected. And we are not there yet, but I would say with this level of agreement, I can foresee that maybe there is more openness to involve our communities and our leadership in shaping how this goes forward. And lastly, I would say definitely access to information. And we may be a far way from where we want to be, but access to information can mean that we have to respect the context in which we exist as communities. And so we would only want to encourage our partners and government institutions to directly engage us and ensure that we have timely access to, I would say, information. Often, again, it is the case that we tend to receive this kind of data related to maybe mining, maybe to logging, way after key decisions have been made. And so now we have to fight to maybe reverse that whole process where sometimes it can be too late. So if that can be changed through Escazú, I think that would definitely empower our communities, but also strengthen the level of governance at our local level and also at the national level. So I think I would leave it there for how I see it going forward.
Thank you, Romario. And Romario, feel free to check the chat. There has actually been a message from Vandas, who is ready to work with the Cacao Village. Okay, so you can check it out. He just left a message in the chat for, your eyes. All right. And just moving on now to Samunda, just to wrap us up. how would the full ratification and implementation of the Escazú Agreement transform your work?
So for me, Suriname has a lot of work. Suriname has not only not ratified the Escazú Agreement, we also have not ratified the ILO number 169. So Suriname has a lot of work to do, but if both of these convention agreements were ratified by Suriname, our land rights were recognized, we were mentioned in the Constitution. It would be easier, especially for community-based organizations, to do the work that we are already doing. We are focused on public participation, right? We want to empower our community members, our leaders. We are building capacity on governance, we are sharing information we're sharing environmental information. But when this agreement would be fully ratified by Suriname, that will also mean that our communities would have more access to information surrounding NDCs, and a lot of other agreements that the government is signing, which our indigenous and tribal communities are really contributing to, but they don't really get the information. They don't know about it because they're not really involved in the whole process. And also building capacity for our communities to be able and to be equipped to make decisions, to take decisions regarding environmental management, right? But what's also important is that if this agreement was fully ratified by Suriname, the rights of environmental defenders, of human rights defenders, our rights would be fully recognized and implemented by law. You would think indigenous rights would also be acknowledged, legally acknowledged. So these are the ways that the Escazú Agreement would transform my work. If we're looking at the access that people have to information, but also public participation, how do you involve, how do you engage indigenous and tribal communities? We all have a way. I remember mentioning this a few times. In Suriname, everybody has their own language. So make sure that information is actually available to people, to communities, that they can access this information through their own languages. And this is not something that's really difficult in Suriname because everybody speaks everybody's language. So make sure that the information is accessible through people's languages. It is very important. We have mentioned this few times, that information is not accessible by we don't have certain infrastructure like internet. And also we can use schools, right? Schools to make certain information accessible for communities, for children. You know that when children go to school, they will go back home and share what they learned at school with their parents. We could use these kind of methods to make sure that certain information reaches communities, reaches children, reaches the youth. So there's different way we could do this. But these are a few that I could mention. Otherwise, I was just talk and talk and talk. So yeah, I will leave it here.
Thank you, Samunda. Thank you all for such an enlightening and thought-provoking discussion this afternoon. I think, the insights that were shared today and even just your experiences on a whole highlight not only the urgency of advancing the Escazú Agreement, but also the hope and determination across our region to protect our people and our planet. So I just want to give you guys a special thanks. Also, thanks to our partners and all of you in the audience for joining us today. Let's continue these vital conversations within our communities, organizations, and let's also try to push our governments. I'll now hand over to Davia, who will handle the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Britney. We appreciate your commitment to human rights and the environment through your participation in today's event. I would also like to thank our speakers for spending their time with us this evening and sharing their expertise. Romario Hastings, Hélène Glénisson, Samunda, Jabini, your work and your insights are truly appreciated for this commemoration of Human Rights Day. We cannot underscore enough the importance of recognizing the rights of environmental defenders, truly bridging the gap between human rights and environmentalism, the very imperative of the Escazú Agreement. Of course, this would not be possible without the support of our sponsors, Canary, FEMA, the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance, and the Stronger Caribbean Together Network. Thank you for all your support. Thank you as well for to our excellent translators, Marie Jose Zengu Tayo and Natasha Zamor, and to our graphics and marketing team, the marketing aid. Lastly, I'd like to thank you, the viewers, for your time and attention. We appreciate your interest and your questions. If you don't get an answer today, you will definitely see it on our pages in the coming days. Our Escazú campaign will continue throughout this week, and we will close out phase 1 of the campaign. We are very grateful for the positive responses we have received towards this campaign, and we hope you will join us again in the new year for phase 2. You can follow the Breadfruit Collective on all pages and sign up to the campaign newsletter for all updates. The link will be in the chat. You can also show your support by posting a picture of yourself with our Escazú campaign support badge. That will also be linked in the chat for you to try it out. If you'd like us to add the badge for you, you can also upload your photos to a drive that's also going to be linked in the chat. We'll send you your photo with the support badge intact. We really appreciate you, and we wish you to have a great evening and a happy Human Rights Day. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.